The other was that at the time I was doing research in schools across the country, not just in New York, about how to teach democracy, how to teach concepts like patriotism, and how to teach students to be civically engaged in their communities, how to keep them involved. And what happened immediately following 9/11, as you heard from the excerpt in the book, was there was news blackouts. Everyone has seen the pictures of the morning in Union Square and the posters and pictures of those things, but very few people, even to this day, have seen the massive weekly protests that followed, calling for calm and reasoned reflection on what happened and not immediate military action without thinking it through. Now, in schools, sort of simultaneous drama was playing out, and that was the quick narrowing of what was allowed to be taught in the curriculum and in classrooms about what it meant to be a patriotic citizen. In the book, we talk about two kinds of patriotism. One is authoritarian patriotism, and the other is democratic kind of patriotism. And I'm just going to quickly talk about what those two mean. Authoritarian patriotism, or blind patriotism, is the kind of patriotism, I think it was G.K. Chesterton who said, my mother, I love my country, right or wrong, is like my mother, drunk or sober, right? It's the moral equivalent of my mother, drunk or sober. And there was, of course, we all know the John Ashcroft admonition to Americans that anyone who criticizes the government is supporting the enemies, right? And Ari Fleischer saying Americans need to watch what they say, Dick Cheney, the list goes on. Similar kind of dynamic was going on in schools. Suddenly, it became not okay to talk about particular kinds of patriotism, namely a more democratic patriotism. So if we have a blind or authoritarian kind of patriotism, is the kind that you might associate with authoritarian regime, a totalitarian state like China, Syria, and so forth. It's a kind of patriotism that wants citizens to ask no questions and to follow leaders reflexively, right, and not think too critically or hard about what the direction our nation should take. A democratic patriotism, on the other hand, is one that asks students, in this case, in schools, to ask tough questions, to pay attention, right, to be civically engaged and to participate in matters of local, national, and global affairs. It's the kind of patriotism you might be expected to find in a democracy, especially one with a long tradition of dissent like ours. But what we were seeing in schools in New York and across the country was suddenly this narrowing of only being able to talk about the kind of support our country kind of patriotism and not ask the tough questions. A couple of examples of some of the more dramatic things that happened. David Dial was a Colorado student who came to school one day wearing a sweatshirt, and on the sweatshirt was an anti-war quote by Albert Einstein, the well-known radical. And David Dahl was asked by the school principal to take the sweatshirt off because it was too disruptive for school activities. And when he refused, he was suspended for 3 days. Now, the ACLU eventually took up Dial's case and won, but you can imagine the chill factor that spreads through schools for students who might be less courageous than David was, or who just might not have the time or fortitude. They'll say, well, I'm just not going to come to school wearing things that I know might cause a ruckus, and I'm also going to stop saying what I think, because clearly political expression is, in many terms, under attack. Another student was Katie Sierra in Virginia, and she wore a T-shirt with a rewritten version of the pledge on it. I think it said something like, I pledge the grievance to the flag, and it ended with, and justice, and peace and justice for some, not all. Now, most teachers would take this as what many people call a teachable moment, right? It's an opportunity to engage in discussion around these ideas and around current events and things that were going on. Well, that's not what happened to Katie Sierra. Her principal, again, came to her and said she needed to take this T-shirt off. She didn't want to. She was suspended for 3 days and was also forbidden from attending her graduation and her senior prom. And some of Katie's classmates told a reporter that they wanted to give Katie a taste of West Virginia justice for disrupting school activities and giving America a bad name. These stories go on, but I want to give one other example because it also happened among teachers. In Albuquerque, New Mexico, there was a group of 5 teachers that were suspended for various things. I'm going to just tell about one, and we can talk about others afterwards in the discussion. But Alan Cooper was one of these teachers, and Alan had done this terrific curriculum where he had students bring in newspaper articles from all around the country and around the world, giving different perspectives on what was going on in the war in Iraq in this case. And the students did research on Iraq, on the history, on American foreign policy, all kinds of things, and they formed all different opinions and displayed all different perspectives about what was going on there. Well, the culmination of Cooper's curriculum was to have students design posters that expressed their opinions about the war. And he had posters that ran the gamut. So some were anti-war posters, some were pro-war posters, they were in between, undecided, and he posted all of these up as for fodder for discussion. Well, principal again, Forrest Mann was his name, came in to the classroom and told Cooper, he said, this poster, and this poster need to be taken down. You need to take those down because, and this is the words of the principal, they're not sufficiently pro-war. Now, before I tell you what Cooper did, I just want to tell you that this was a school that had a school-wide activity where students were writing letters to the troops to support the troops. They had pro-war banners in the lobby of the school supportive of American foreign policy. And so it wasn't that politics was being kept out of the schools, right? It was that a particular kind of politics, only one kind, was allowed in. Now, Cooper said that he didn't feel comfortable taking some students' posters down because they had worked hard on them, and he wasn't comfortable with that, and he was suspended without pay. Again, the ACLU, which is becoming my favorite organization, took up his case and did eventually win, but again, you can imagine the chill factor that spreads across the country for teachers who hear these stories and might not want to have their careers jeopardized in the way that Alan Cooper was willing to. Now, I don't want to be all doom and gloom because at the same time that all of these examples of strange events, and by the way, there are also many policies that are supporting this. So last June, you know this bill, right, in Florida, it was finally put into law on July 1st, 2006, and Florida passed a law that history, it mandated the teaching of what they called traditional American history. And what the law says specifically is that history must be taught as fact, as factual, knowable, and testable, and not open to interpretation. That's the words of the law. That's a sort of postmodern revisionist form of history that has no place in the schools. Now, while most historians were laughing at this ruling, teachers were not, because it greatly restricted the ways they were allowed to teach kids about history. And of course, we all know that history is in constant contestation, right? It's always being renewed, and it's always being, that doesn't mean that there are no facts. We can all agree that the War of 1812 was in 1812, but how you put those facts together, that's right. Exactly. And how we tell the stories and from what perspective is always up to debate and up to different opinions. And so laws like that one and others that have been passed throughout the country since 9/11 really threaten the kind of democratic teaching that we'd like to see going on in schools. Now, I said I wasn't going to be all doom and gloom. There are pockets of terrific hope, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of teachers across the country who do wonderful things, either by going against these policies and laws or by working around them, but accomplishing great things. And we can talk about those in the discussion.